Hi there. It's 2021 and it's the 1st of February and it's the festival of Ewes milk or Imbolc and happy Imbolc in that case. It's also the festival of St. Bridget, and Bridget's fire, which is the fire of spiritual healing by tradition. And I thought it would be a good appropriate day to talk about or return to the subject of spiritual healing, which I've covered elsewhere on this channel. And it seems to me that there's sort of two types of spiritual healing, or two paradigms that govern the idea of spiritual healing. One of which can be broken down itself into two, and the other is a separate entity, which I'll come back to in a minute. The first one is what I would call energetic healing, which is on the far left here. And that basically follows the second law of thermodynamics that whilst the form changes, energy remains the same and the amount of energy doesn't change. And so our bodies, our health changes over time, even though the sort of universal energy running through these changes remains the same. And I've got here the sort of, that again, the form changes according to the three modes: creativity, preservation, and destruction. So the idea basically is that spiritual healing on the energetic level, healing modes like acupuncture and homeopathy and even naturopathy or herbology, sort of kind of hold our hands, as it were, as we go through life, and we notice changes happening to our bodies over time. And the things are the interaction between creativity, preservation, and destruction. Create a complex matrix of changes of form in our bodies, and it is as though at various transition stages in our over our lives, various modes of energetic healing can ameliorate the distress that can be caused through by these changes. But I mean, there's nothing stopping the forces of entropy, the forces ultimately of destruction and dispersion, taking it's just that we have a better time of it, as it were. So that's kind of one half of a certain way of looking at spiritual healing. And the other half is a bit more fanciful in that here I've got energy changes and form remains the same. So by changing or increasing the frequency of energies, you can in fact increase your longevity, your lifespan increases, and perhaps even reach immortality by this means. I say fanciful, and I've got this box in quotation marks because it seems to me that this doesn't make any sense really. That energy changes and the form stays the same. I mean, it doesn't happen in this world. Energy stays the same and form changes. That's the physics law, the law governing bodies, as it were. But psychically, people claim that you can increase or change the frequency of the vibration of energy, thereby preserving the existing form on the day in which you started to cultivate this increase or change of frequency of energies or change of energies, and that's the day that your form will be fixed, either for a very very long time. And we read about the patriarchs in the Torah living to 300 years old. I think it was Moses or what was who is it? Elijah or Enoch, living to a very, very great age. Abraham, for example, 200 years old. And the form didn't change or change very slowly because the energy, the psychic energy, was changing around or within Abraham as a result of his spiritual connection to the Creator God. And this would suggest some kind of supernatural or supranatural psychic energy being cultivated or released or developed or initiated in order to increase energy, change energy, in order to keep form or our bodies, our physical bodies, the same. Um, I don't know about this really. It seems like a sort of Alice in Wonderland topsy-turvy way of looking at life as it is. It does smack of life as we would wish it to be. So, and we have this idea of the sorcerer attempting to find immortality by doing really some crazy psychic energy workings and magic in order to find the universal panacea, in order to find something that will keep him or her alive forever, holding on to things. It seems to go against the spirit that this world should inspire in us, which of course is to let go, ungrasp our physical bodies and to let the energy flow as it will, flow to ground, I suppose, and take us the form of that energy with it. And we eventually we die, and the elements that gave us life, well, we return to those elements, but perhaps in an unconscious and conscious way. There is no consciousness attached to this process of dying and death and transition to the blind forces of nature, as it were, that gave us life in the first place. Be that as it may, the other way of looking at spiritual healing is that you're cultivating a consciousness which transcends both form and energy. So you can imagine, and I thought before the Big Bang, as it were, before matter was created, before energy and matter formed a relationship with one another, there was a sort of proto matter, which perhaps was neither energy nor matter, but something altogether transcendental. But that's considering things from from the Big Bang perspective, from the moment of creation, from the perspective of the Creator God. But it could be that there is yet another dimension which transcends creation itself, and therefore transcends matter and form. But of course, people will ask, well, how can you have consciousness without energy? How can you have consciousness without form? You need neurological forms, as in neurons in the brain, and you need electrical energy, as in the path of that electrons take through the brain's neural pathways in order to have consciousness. But perhaps, ironically enough, it's possible to develop consciousness over time with meditation and ritual and other practices that will mean that ultimately, when you cast off your mortal coil, that you won't need form or energy to exist. That you will become aware or go into an awareness of a transcendental state, which is in fact the state which transcends the lower worlds or transcends the physical altogether, and indeed transcends the psychic for that matter, because you may suppose that the psychic is also partly dependent on form and energy for its manifestation. If one's not going to get too fanciful about this, I have problems with the word psychic and the word energy, because New Agers use energy wrongly, and they have this metaphysics called psychism or psychic manifestation, which as a scientist and geneticist, that means practically nothing to me, really. It's more of a sort of metaphorical language, a fanciful metaphorical language. And basically, you might as well be talking about Harry Potter than anything genuine. But in the 19th century, there was an obsession with psychism because people wanted to survive death, wholly or partly, or preferably wholly. So there was a sort of psychic bridge between the physical and the spiritual. But I think that I've argued elsewhere in this channel that that bridge could be a false bridge at the very least, or a non-existent bridge. But whilst we are in this dimension, we are in this dimension of physicality. But it's possible to direct our consciousness beyond and above, as it were, in commas, in quotation marks, beyond and above where we are now, to somewhere which is transcendental of matter and energy, for that matter. I had this dream a couple of days ago where there's big, huge tsunamis, waves crashing over a city, and I was climbing to the tops of various structures, man-made structures and buildings and high-rise buildings and things like that. And I was, the waves kept on coming over me, and I kept on climbing higher and higher. I mean, first of all, I was climbing trees in order to escape the waves, and then I was climbing these buildings trying to escape the waves. But in actual fact, it's afterwards I woke up because it was kind of a frightening dream, and it was getting worse and worse and more hectic. So it was time to pull the plug on that dream. But afterwards, when I was contemplating my experience, it seems to me that really all I had to do, and I had a sort of a kind of a vehicle, an airborne vehicle as well with me, where why didn't I just sort of use the vehicle to go towards the sky and go high enough, higher than the waves and higher than the buildings. But I never thought of that. I never thought I could just point the nose of my airborne craft up into the sky and just and not try to cope with the waves coming over me or the buildings that were crashing down on me because of the waves. And I take that as a sort of, I suppose, as a kind of an allegory, I suppose, of what I've been talking about today. But anyway, be that as it may, perhaps spiritual healing can therefore be defined as the cultivation of a consciousness that will follow us. Well, what does that mean? Not follow us, but be us in a transcendental state. And so, therefore, all these other modalities of spiritual healing, which I've covered, the one which helps us through the various changes that we experience during life, and the one that perhaps extends life by changing the nature of energy itself, which is a sort of psychic way of looking at it. But the third way is literally, whilst you're alive, almost preparing for death, as it were. So that spiritual healing can be defined as the cultivation of a consciousness which will transcend both energy and matter, and therefore the demise of matter at the very least, transcending energy itself and transcending this universe itself. And that's really what spiritual healing actually is. And it's nothing to do with, curing a toothache or extending life. It's transcending life itself. But I'm not rejecting any definition of spiritual healing. I'm not rejecting any modality of spiritual healing. I'm not saying that transcendental meditation is a higher form of spiritual healing than these others that I've described. I'm just sort of categorizing them so that when you do spiritual healing, or when you're thinking about spiritual healing, that you know where you are, as it were, on the map of consciousness relevant to the issue of spiritual healing itself.